There are hundreds of basic and alternate recipes in Satisfactory 1.0. Some of them are absolutely amazing, whilst others not so much. So I've made it my mission in Satisfactory to compare every single recipe in the game to inform you guys on what the best and worst recipes are. So welcome to the best recipes in Satisfactory 1.0 series. Today's recipe is all about fuel, which is made by extracting crude oil. Oil plays a critical role in Satisfactory, so the last thing you want to do is waste it. It's used to create plastic, rubber, petroleum coke. Most importantly, it's used as a source of fuel. You can then plop it into the fuel generator, where it has a burn rate of 20 metric cubes per minute. In case you're wondering, the best fuel to burn is ionized fuel. I've got an entire video dedicated to this coming out very, very soon. In second place though is the rocket fuel, closely followed by the turbo fuel, and unfortunately joint last is the fuel and liquid biofuel. But you need this to create any of this. I cannot understate its importance. However, there might be a chance that you are creating this liquid gold wrong. Let me show you what I mean. If we were to ignore this resource well extractor, we can extract 9,900 crude oil in a single world. And let's say for whatever reason you want to use all this crude oil to make fuel, which I don't really recommend, but let's say you were to do this for the example, right? 9,900 crude oil used straight into fuel creates 6,600 metric cubes, which is a decent amount. Again, it's alright. But let's say you want to then convert all this fuel into power. This creates a total of 82,500 megawatts of power, using every single drop of crude oil in your game. This is where our key recipe comes into play. Again, starting off with the 9,900 crude oil. Then, rather than turning this into fuel, instead, you want to be turning it into heavy oil residue. With this, you can make 13,200 metric cubes of it, which is not too bad at all. You then have to combine this with 26,000 water, which is a lot. I will admit that is a lot, but bear in mind again, we are using every single drop of crude oil in the world, so you probably won't be needing this much for your factory. But let's say you were to combine these two, you could produce a whopping 26,400 fuel per minute, which is absolutely incredible. And of course, this then means you can make 330,000 megawatts worth of power compared to the 80,000 from before, just essentially by adding water into your factory, which, I mean, that is a massive jump. It's huge, in fact. 330,000 megawatts, a third of a million. That's not too bad. So let's analyze that fuel recipe a little bit closer. Regular fuel is made right here in the refinery, where you can get 40 fuel per 60 crude oil. You also get 30 polymer resin per minute, but this is not the best recipe at all for polymer resin. For that, you would want to use the polymer resin alternate recipe, where you make heavy oil residue as a byproduct and an absolute load of polymer resin, which you can then turn to plastic and rubber. A few of you might have noticed that there's also another recipe called residential fuel, and yes, this works as well. 60 heavy oil residue creates 40 fuel per minute, and 60 heavy oil residue requires just 45 crude oil, so you're saving 15 crude oil per minute. But the recipe we are making is called diluted fuel, which is not made in the refinery, but instead it's made in this thing, the blender. And I am not joking when I say that I absolutely love this recipe, because again, let's say we are trying to make 40 fuel per minute, which is what we were making with the first recipe. This only requires 20 heavy oil residue, which is just 15 crude oil. This is compared to the 60 crude oil we're using from before. So this saves you so much. You're saving 3/4 of your crude oil, 3/4, which you can use to make so many items in the game. You can make rubber, plastic, fuel, obviously, diamonds, heavy oil residue, and polymer resin, which both of these are used to make dozens of other recipes. So definitely try to save it if you can, or at least use it wisely. Now, the water consumption might be a bit of an issue, because you have to bear in mind with the first recipe, you only need to have one refinery that turns the crude oil into the fuel. That is it, one process. However, this alternate diluted fuel recipe, which again I 1000% recommend that you use, requires you to produce a ton of water, which is going to cost you a lot of parts, obviously, to make the water extractors, and a lot of time, and effort, and power, and potentially even containers if you want to transport it as a solid rather than a liquid. Same with the heavy oil residue. This now requires you to place down a bunch more refineries compared to if you were just making the regular recipe. And of course, to make this, you then need the crude oil. So it's a lot more parts to produce the same thing, but again, in my opinion, because this is just my opinion, I think it's worth it. Absolutely. Let me know in the comments let me know in the comments down below, do you guys use the diluted fuel recipe? And if so, do you recommend it to fellow pioneers? Apologies for such a short video, but I've kind of said everything I'd like to say, and I don't really want to waste your time too much, so I'm pretty happy with how this one went. But before we go, a massive thank you to our members, Mau Mau, Skull and Hattie, Lo, Nitormal, Chaos Rising, Cutthroat Zoo, Yamikel, and Tio Rico.